Hey student, in this lesson we are going to learn about the eye, its structure and its functions. So when we look at the eye, let's first observe its location. So we all know that the eye is present in the facial region and it is located or it is present inside a socket, right? Now next, let's have a look at its protection. So what all organs are present around and in the eyes which provides it protection. So when I talk about protection, first let's see the eyelids which are present over the upper and lower surface of the eye. So let's draw. So this is an external structure of eye where we know that there are eyelids present over the upper and inner surface, right? These are the eyelids. So eyelids, they have some eyelashes, right? And these eyelashes, they help the eye to be protected from the various dust material. They also shut as soon as they feel that the high light and intensity is coming over the eye. So this is the main function of the eyelids. Next, when we talk about the second part, we see that there is present the eyelashes as well, right? Sorry, the eyebrows I said. So this is the eyebrows which is present just over the eyes, and these eyebrows, although they are not directly related with the protection, but whenever it rains or we perspire, so they absorb these water, okay? Next we are going to see one very important thing, which are the tear glands. So tear glands are located somewhere around the upper sideward region of the eye, okay, and these glands are termed as lacrimal glands, okay. These are the lacrimal glands. Now as the name suggests, these are the tear glands. So what is their function? Well, they have 6 to 12 pairs of ducts in there, with the help of which they release a fluid which we call as tears. Now what is the function of this fluid or the tears? Firstly, we know that the tears, they help in lubricating the eye, okay. So the entire surface of eye is covered by this fluid substance. Next we see that the tears, they also have some kind of antimicrobial property, and this is due to the presence of lysozyme. This is the lysozyme. So lysozyme is an enzyme which is antimicrobial in property. Next, when we talk about the tears, we see that they also help us in removal of dust from our eyes. And lastly, as we all know, that it is a kind of communicating fluid. So what happens is, whenever we are emotional, so whenever we are happy or whenever we are sad, lot of times we see that this lacrimal gland, it produces a huge amount of fluid which we call as tears. So this is the function of tears and lacrimal gland. The next thing that helps in the protection is the conjunctiva. Conjunctiva, okay. This conjunctiva is present over the entire surface of the eye and it continues with the inner eyelids, okay. Here what happens is, this conjunctiva, it's a very thin layer, and over the cornea it forms a single layer. Whenever there is any kind of infection of conjunctiva, we call it conjunctivitis. So conjunctivitis, it is a viral infection in which this layer becomes red in color, okay, and I'm sure you must have seen, maybe in your classroom or in your family members, that people getting conjunctiva are not supposed to move out or be in touch with a lot of people because this is a communicable disease. So this is the conjunctiva. So this was about the location and protection of eyes. Coming next, let's have a look at the structure of eye. So as we know, the eye, it is present in the eye socket, right? So this is the eyeball which is present in the eye socket. Now let's have a look at the different layers of eye now. So here we see that eye is formed of 3 layers which I have drawn in green, orange and blue color in here. The first layer that we are going to observe is the sclera, okay. This is called as sclera, and sclera, it is a fibrous tough layer, okay, and this sclera, when it comes in the frontal part of the eye, it becomes thinner, and we see that this part is what we call the cornea, okay. It appears whitish in color and this is what we call the cornea. Now coming to the second layer, it is called, this orangish one in here, it is called as choroid. We will call it choroid. Choroid, it is a very important layer of the eye. It is so because it is highly rich in blood vessels. Okay, in choroid there is a pigment also present, and this pigment is called as melanin. Okay, choroid, it is very important also because it, prevents the reflection and scattering of light inside the eye. Now when we come to the frontal part, we see that the extension of choroid, it forms two types of structures. Okay, the first structure in here is what we call the ciliary body. Okay, we call it ciliary body, and this another extension in here is the iris. So let's first talk about the ciliary body. The ciliary body is composed of muscles, okay, and from them, emerges the suspensory ligament. Next, when we talk about the iris, we see that they are also made up of muscle fibers, and these muscle fibers are radial and circular. It is very important and very interesting also for you to know that the iris, the muscle arrangement in them is very unique in each and every individual. So a lot of times you see that there is, the eye, basically the identification occurs with the help of eye. So this is because of the different type of arrangement of muscles which every individual have in a different or other set. Okay. Now between the eye, as you can see, there is some space, and this is the space which we call as pupil. This is the pupil. Okay. Now coming to the function of iris once again, we see that this is the space which is pupil present between the iris. So iris has the muscles which have the ability to basically constrict or dilate depending upon the amount of light falling upon this pupil. So we can say that when there is high intensity of light falling upon the pupil, what would happen? The iris will dilate so that more of the surface it can cover. Alright, but when we see that, there is the less amount of light falling on the eye, in the dim light, it will basically constrict. So these are the two things that would happen in here, the dilation and the constriction. It will happen only so as to, make this space smaller or larger depending upon the light falling on the eyes. So this was about the second layer, which is the choroid. Coming to the third layer, we see that the innermost layer in here, it is the retina. This is retina. Now what happens at the retina? Retina contains the sensory cells or the sensitive cells, and these cells are of two types. These are firstly the rods, and the second are the cones. So these are the two types of sensitive cells which are present in the inner surface of eye, which is the retina. This is the innermost layer. Now how about rods? What is the important function of rods? Well, these rods, they contain a pigment which is a visual purple pigment which we call as rhodopsin. Okay, this is rhodopsin. Similarly, when we talk about the cones, they contain a pigment called as iodopsin. Okay. Now coming to the functions, the rods, they are mainly related with the vision in the dim light. Okay, and they are not related with any kind of color vision. They are only helpful in the vision in the dim light. But when we come to cones, we see that they are responsible for the vision in bright light, and also they are responsible for the colored vision as well. So these are the pigments which help them in doing so. Now while we are talking about the retina, when we are talking about the sclera and choroid, we see that at this spot, okay, which falls directly as in front of the lens, we see that here, this spot is what we can call as yellow spot, or we can also call it as macula densa. or fovea centralis. Okay, we can give it three names: the yellow spot, the macula densa, this is macula densa, and the other name can also be fovea centralis. Okay, why do we now call it the yellow spot or the fovea centralis? Well, we see that at this point we can find the brightest image. It is so because this point has the maximum density of the cone cells, okay, and hence we call it yellow spot or the macula densa. Coming a little downwards, we see that at this point, okay, at this point there are no images formed. And why is it so? Well, it is so because at this point the optic nerve, it moves out of the eye and it goes to the brain. So we call this spot as the blind spot. Okay, we call it as the blind spot, and here almost no kind of cells are present. Okay, so this was about the sclera, choroid and retina. Now coming to this internal structure where we see this structure, we call this as the lens. This is the lens. Okay, so lens, it is present just behind the iris. Okay, and this lens is basically crystalline, it is solid and it is biconvex. As you can see, it is biconvex. Okay, this lens, it is held by some structures which we call as the suspensory ligament. These are suspensory ligament, and these suspensory ligaments are held by the ciliary body. So the circular muscles of the ciliary body, they basically help in changing the convexity of this lens. Depending upon the light, the distance, etc., the ciliary body is very, very important, and along with the sensory ligament, it basically changes its shape. Okay, so this was about the structure of eye, where we have seen the three types of layer. We have seen the iris, pupil, cornea, suspensory ligament, lens. Now coming to the two types of chambers which are found in the eyes. Okay, and these two type of chambers, the first one in here is called as the aqueous chamber. Okay, this is the aqueous chamber, and inner one is the vitreous chamber. What is the importance of these chambers? Well, when I talk about the aqueous, okay, when we talk about the aqueous chamber, we see that there is this aqueous, meaning it is very, very watery fluid. This is very important, the aqueous chamber. It is important basically to keep the shape of the lens and this part lubricated. Okay. Next, when I come to the vitreous humor, it is a jelly-like fluid which is present in this internal space between the lens and the retina. The importance of vitreous humor is that it keeps the eye, its shape intact. So eye, since it forms like this, it is a spherical structure, it is because of this vitreous chamber. So these are two chambers. In the aqueous chamber, the aqueous fluid is filled. In the vitreous chamber, the vitreous fluid is filled. So now we have learned about the structure of eye. Next we are going to see its working. In the working of eye, we first see that there is the entry of light. So in the entry of light, what we notice in here, that the light, it moves from, firstly we can say that it moves from the cornea, right? Next to the cornea, it will reach the aqueous humor. Okay. Next to it is present the pupil and then the lens, we can say. So we will write lens. After lens is the vitreous humor. Okay. And final is the retina. So first is the entry of light. Now as the second step, we will see the focusing of light. Now what would happen in the focusing of light? Well, in here we see that while in the entry of light, the light has been entered from all these paths. When it moves from all these paths, let's say from the cornea. So these are the two light rays which are falling, okay. After it moves from the cornea, the light rays converges a little bit, and after they move from the lens, they converge further, okay. So these will converge further like this. This is the converging of light, and now the light, it falls upon the retina. So we see that in the retina, when the light falls on retina, this image is found to be real and inverted, okay. This image is inverted, alright. Next we will see the production of impulse, okay. The production, we can say, of impulse. Now when the light has fallen upon the retina, of course it has to go to the brain, otherwise how will we see an image? How will we see anything? So what would happen? Firstly, the light which has fallen upon the retina, this light, because of the sensory cells present in there, it will convert into the chemical energy, okay. It will convert into the chemical form, let's say, and finally these cells, they will convert this into an electrical impulse, and this electrical impulse which is formed by these cells will be taken out with the help of the optic nerve. So this is the optic nerve which brings the impulses from the eye to the brain, okay. So finally we will see that the impulse has moved to the brain, and now as the last part we will see the brain interpretation. This is the brain interpretation, in which we see that maybe the image was found was inverted, but here the brain always see an upright image. The brain, it basically interprets this image and it is making us to see this image as the upright image. So this is the working of an eye, where the main function of this eye is to basically let us see things. It is the sight of vision. So next we are going to see another term in here which is very important for us to know, and that is called accommodation. This is accommodation. So what is the meaning of accommodation? Well, accommodation, it means the process of focusing the eye to see different objects at distant place, okay. So whenever we do this process, so obviously we know that when we have to see different types of objects at different distance, so we have to accommodate accordingly. Now how do we do that? Well, for that let's consider three situations. In the first, when we are doing the distant vision, okay. So first is the case where we are talking about the distant vision, right. In such situation, what would happen, that the lens which is going to focus, okay, in this condition, this lens, it becomes flattened, okay. The lens, it becomes thinner and flattened, alright. So this is the case for the distant vision. Next, when we see to a nearby object, so we call it the nearby vision, alright. This is the nearby vision. In such a case, what would happen to the lens? Well, this lens, it becomes convex, okay. It becomes very much convex, or we can also say it becomes rounded kind of thing. So this is the case when there is the nearby vision. Now what happened in the normal condition? So the third is the normal condition, alright. So the nearby and normal conditions are pretty same. We see in here that in the normal condition, the lens, it becomes slightly concave, okay. It remains slightly concave, like we know. This is the normal position or normal, shape of the lens. So we say that here in the normal condition, the lens becomes slightly convex. So this is how the lens, it accommodates itself when it has to focus upon any object at a distance. So this is about the accommodation. Next we are going to see another thing which is very, very important, and we call it light and dark vision. So let's talk about the light and dark vision in here. So why are we talking about the light and dark vision? Well, we are doing it so that we know how our eyes, they adapt themselves whenever we move from one type of region to the other, which means that for example, if we are in a light region where there is sufficient amount of light. Next, what happens to our eyes when we suddenly move to a darker region? For example, let's say a cinema hall. So when we enter a cinema hall, or let's say when we enter our home wherein the lights are off, okay. So from the sunlight, when we are entering a room, let's say, what happened in there? So in the dark vision, what happen is that the pigment, okay, which is present in the rods, what do we call it? It is rhodopsin, right? It is rhodopsin. So the rhodopsin, it regenerates after it gets bleached when you were present in the lighter region, okay. So the rhodopsin regenerates. The second, when we talk about the pupil, so in this case the pupil, it dilates, alright. Now why does it dilate? We see that whenever we are present in a darker region, whenever we are present in the dim light, we see that in this dim light, basically the pupil, it's basically the diameter increases. Now when this space increases, it allows the light to fall on the retina properly, because if the space is less, the very less amount of light can fall on the retina, and hence the image may or may not be formed properly. So whenever you are present in the darker region, the pupil, it dilates so that more amount of light can go inside the eyes, and this rods, the rhodopsin or the visual purple pigment, it regenerates. Now coming to the light thing. So during the light adaptation, now if I am moving from the dark room back to the sunlight, again my eyes, they have to adapt themselves. And how do they do it? During this time, this rhodopsin, okay, this rhodopsin, it gets bleached, alright. So the rhodopsin gets bleached, and this time a lot of light is not required to get in your eyes. So what will happen to the pupil? Well, the pupil will constrict. Simple, right? So we have seen in here the light and dark adaptation, wherein we have seen that when you are present in the light region, okay, so the rhodopsin, it gets bleached and the pupil constricts. But when you move from this lighter region to the dark ones, what happens is that this rhodopsin, it regenerates, alright, and the pupil dilates. So this was about the accommodation and the light and dark adaptation. So student, in this lesson we have seen everything about the eye, right from its structure, then its working, these new terms that we had to see, the accommodation and the light and dark adaptation. Next we are going to talk about the defects.